As I mentioned in a previous video, my mum and sister want me to build them a whole bunch of furniture, including 2 dining tables. It's going to be out of Tassie oak, which this is here, and they bought a whole bunch of these pre-laminated kitchen bench tops. I think there are 6 or 7 here, and they're 600 wide, which isn't quite wide enough for a kitchen table, but it will be for some of the other things. So what I need to do is rip this at 350mm and glue it to one of the other slabs, and then we'll have basically the tabletop already done. So before we go on any further than this, I sort of need to get something a little bit awkward out of the way, but we'll get to that part and I'll backtrack a little bit. So as I said, I'm making a whole bunch of furniture for my mum and sister, and I think currently they're up to 11 pieces that they want. Now, they'd been browsing furniture stores for a while, and I think they were prepared to spend $4,000 or $5,000 to get furniture that was close to what they wanted, but ultimately those sort of stores don't offer any sort of customization. You either get this or you go somewhere else. So for me to build what they want, even buying the materials compared to those stores, because they're not going to pay labour, they were going to save literally thousands of dollars. On some items, they'll be saving at least 50%. Now, I was reluctant but happy enough to build the furniture for them for nothing, just they pay for materials and that's it. But that didn't sit overly well with my mum and sister, and they wanted to pay. So they bought me a tool because I couldn't figure out how much I wanted them to pay me. And I decided to go with something that would help build them the furniture quicker so that they could get it into their homes quicker. And this is where it gets a bit awkward. It's one of those tools that I would never, well, I say never, I wouldn't buy for myself because it is quite expensive and it is a luxury item. But for this case, for these projects, it's going to make everything go together very quickly and make it pretty high quality. And if you haven't guessed, I got a domino. So you might think, oh wow, I'm really ripping off family. Well, this costs $14.40 Australian dollars, which means that over 11 pieces of furniture, that averages out to labour being about $130, which actually isn't all that much per item of furniture. For the design that my sister wants, she wants the stretcher to basically be invisible. So the easiest way to do that is attach it directly underneath the table to both the legs. So to do that, I've marked out a 90 by 40 recess. So the stretcher is 90mm wide by 40 thick. And I'm now going to cut this out. Now I'm going to use the router to really clean it up, but to hog out the majority of the material, I'm going to just use a drill and a Forstner bit, which will get me most of my depth and make it a lot quicker to route. In my last video where I used a router and a guide bearing, guide bushing I should say, I didn't go into any depth on how they work. If you've never used one before, this bushing sits in my router. This one is a replaceable turn lock one from Milescraft, and this is a 5/8 of an inch one, and I'm using a 1/2 inch cutter. That means there's a 1/8 difference between the cutter width and the outside diameter. That means on either side of the cutter there's 1/16 of an inch. So that translates into about 1.6 millimeters. So I've measured on my templates 1.6 millimeters back from the lines that I want to actually cut out and stuck my templates on that edge. That way the cutter will be positioned on my line rather than 1/16 back from my line if I was to glue my templates on the original line I'd drawn. So this table is finally done. As mentioned, it's a Tassie oak table, and as you would have seen, it's finished with Minuax's water-based poly, and the top has a nice coat of paste wax on top of the poly, which really adds a really lovely touch to it and makes everything look so much smoother and feel so much smoother. It has a little bit of rack and force. I've only attached a few of the bolts up into the table. It's actually a lot easier if you install the bolts when the table's upside down, but I can't then lift the table back onto its feet. So when I install them in my sister's house, I'll get someone to help me to do that. The next project will be a traditional, or the next table project will have a traditional apron on it, and I'll go into more detail than I did with this one. But at this stage I'm not sure when that will appear. Thanks for watching.